In this video, I'll give you a complete beginner's guide to how battling works in Pokemon TCG Pocket. Let's talk about cards a little bit first. We can split cards into two categories, Pokemon cards and trainer cards, which can in turn be separated into item cards and supporter cards. Pokemon cards are the most common cards in the game, and it is with these cards that you battle your opponent with. Let's take a closer look at these Pokemon cards. If you look at the top right corner of any Pokemon card, you see that Pokemon's health points, or HP for short, and their type. There are 10 types of Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket, and their names are a little bit different to what you might be used to if you're coming from other Pokemon games. For example, there's no rock type and fighting are kind of combined into one type, a fighting type, electric type is called lightning, and steel is called metal. If you look at the middle part of the card, you see that Pokemon's abilities and attacks, how much and what kind of energy it costs to use them, and how much damage they deal. On top left, you can see a tag that will say Basic, Stage 1 or Stage 2. Basic Pokemon are the base evolution form that can be played out onto the board instantly. You can evolve basic Pokemon into Stage 1 Pokemon and Stage 1 Pokemon into Stage 2 Pokemon. Not all Pokemon can evolve, and those that can might only have a Stage 1 evolution. There are also EX cards, which are usually super powerful. These are the cards featured in the most powerful decks at the moment, but more on that later. EX cards can be of any stage of evolution, from basic like Pikachu EX and Mewtwo EX, to Stage 1 like Arcanine EX and Executor EX, to Stage 2 like Charizard EX and Machamp EX. Trainer cards are essential to any deck. In fact, most decks I've built usually end up having more trainer cards than Pokemon cards. Like we mentioned earlier, trainer cards can be separated into item cards and supporter cards. Item cards are useful utility cards that you can play alongside your Pokemon cards. You can play as many item cards in your turn as you want. There are currently a limited amount of item cards in the game, with most useful of them being Pokeball, Potion, and X-Speed. Pokeball draws one random basic Pokemon from your deck, Potion heals 20 damage from one of your Pokemon, and X-Speed reduces the cost of retreating your active Pokemon by 1 energy. Unlike item cards, you can only use one supporter card per turn, so choose carefully. The best supporter card in the game is Professor's Research, who when played draws 2 cards from your deck. Card drawing is always a strong ability, and it's especially strong in Pokemon Pocket due to its tiny deck size. Other must-have supporter cards are Sabrina, Giovanni, Misty for water Pokemon, and Erika for grass Pokemon. Pokemon Pocket decks consist of 20 cards, and you can have 2 copies of each card. So technically, you can just have 10 unique cards times 2. This makes the deck building pretty simple at the moment, especially because there are certain trainer cards you have to have in your deck if you want to perform well. We already mentioned some of them earlier, but I'll go over them again. I never built a deck without 2 copies of the following trainer cards: Professor's Research, Pokeball, Sabrina, Giovanni, and to a lesser extent, Potion. For the purposes of deck building, EX Pokemon are different from their regular counterpart, so you can, for example, have 2 normal Pikachu and 2 Pikachu EX in one deck. Before we move on to battling, let's take a look at the game board. It's split in 2, and in the top half you see your opponent's cards, and in the bottom half your own cards. You'll notice that you have 4 spots on your side of the board where you can place cards. The biggest spot on top is called your active spot, and this is where you place your Pokemon that you want to attack with. Only Pokemon in your active spot can attack unless they have a special ability that allows them to attack from the bench, like Greninja. Under the active spot, you have the bench where you put your backup Pokemon. They can switch with your active Pokemon or support your active Pokemon with abilities. On the right of your active spot, you can see your deck. If you click on it, you'll see how many cards you have left in your deck. When it's your turn to play, you draw 1 card from your deck automatically. At the very bottom, you can see your hand. These are the cards you've drawn from your deck and you can play out on your turn. You can have up to 10 cards in your hand. In the bottom right corner of the board, you have your energy zone, where you generate 1 energy every turn except turn 1. Right under your deck, you have your discard pile, also called a graveyard. These are the cards you've already used, like your trainer cards, and any knocked out Pokemon will also be added to the graveyard. In order to win a game in Pokemon Pocket, you need to knock out 3 of your opponent's Pokemon faster than they knock out 3 of your Pokemon. When you knock out an EX Pokemon, it counts as knocking out 2 Pokemon. But remember, if you're using an EX Pokemon yourself and they get knocked out, you lose 2 of your 3 life points. You can see how many points you have at the bottom left of the screen. For your opponent's points, look to the top right of the screen. You knock out a Pokemon by attacking them and reducing their HP to 0. If your opponent only has an active Pokemon and no benched Pokemon, and you manage to KO their active Pokemon, you automatically win the game, since there's no Pokemon they can replace their active Pokemon with. Running out of cards in your deck does not result in a loss, but if the turn count reaches 30, the game will enforce a draw automatically. When you start a battle in Pokemon Pocket, the first thing that happens is a coin flip to see who goes first. Heads, you go first, and tails, you go second. There are advantages to both, and whether you want to go first or second depends on the deck you're playing. When you go first, you do not get an energy on turn 1, meaning you usually can't attack your opponent on turn 1. There are exceptions to this rule, and we'll talk about them a little bit later. The advantage of going first is you get to evolve your Pokemon faster than your opponent, so this is especially useful if you are playing a deck with Pokemon that evolve twice. When you go second in-game, you usually get to attack your opponent first because you get an energy on your first turn. The next thing you need to do, again this is done before the game starts, is to put a Pokemon from your hand into the active spot. You have to have a Pokemon in your active spot in order to start the game. You can play any basic Pokemon into your active spot or onto your bench in preparation stage. Each player starts with 5 cards in their opening hand. You might wonder, what if I don't draw a basic Pokemon in my opening hand? Well, that's never going to happen because the game forces at least one basic Pokemon into your starting hand every game, so you always have a Pokemon to put in your active spot. You can also place up to 3 basic Pokemon into your bench during this stage. Once you've done setting up, you can start battle. Pokemon battles are played sequentially, so every player makes their moves in turn, one after the other, like in chess or standard Hearthstone. The player who goes first can only do certain things on first turn since they don't generate any energy. So you can play out your item cards and one supporter card and any other basic Pokemon you've drawn. You cannot attack this turn and you cannot evolve your Pokemon. The player who goes second can do all of that, but they can also attach one energy and attack on their turn. Attaching an energy is one of the most important things you have to do every turn. You can attach energy to your active or benched Pokemon. If you only have one type of Pokemon in your deck, for example fire, you will only get fire energy in your energy zone. However, if you have multiple types of Pokemon in your deck, the energy generated in the energy zone is random. It can be quite frustrating not getting the energy you need, so almost always just stick with having one type of Pokemon in one deck. For some Pokemon, you might see this white colored star energy for some of their abilities. This is called a colorless energy. If you look at Mewtwo for example, you see that it costs 1 psychic energy and 1 colorless energy to perform his first attack. Colorless energy can be paid with any kind of energy. So you can attach 1 psychic energy and say for example 1 lightning energy and still perform the attack. Retreating always costs colorless energy, that is, you can retreat an active Pokemon with any type of energy as long as you have enough of it. When you're finished attaching energy and playing your supporter and item cards, you can attack with your active Pokemon, if it has enough energy to do so. When a Pokemon attacks, it deals damage to the opposing active Pokemon. Once the damage exceeds the defending Pokemon's HP, it's knocked out and you get 1 prize point towards victory. Or 2 if you knocked out an EX Pokemon. Attacking with your active Pokemon will always end your turn, so make sure to do everything you need to do before you attack. On turn 3, the player who went first now gets to evolve their basic Pokemon if they want to do so. This is why it's more advantageous to go first sometimes. If your deck has a lot of stage 2 evolutions, going first will help you get there quicker. A Pokemon needs to be in play for a full turn before you can evolve it, so you cannot evolve a Pokemon twice in one turn. You can also retreat a Pokemon once during your turn, which means swapping your active Pokemon out for a benched one. You need to have at least 1 bench Pokemon to retreat your active Pokemon. Most Pokemon require an energy cost to retreat them. This is why Starmie EX is considered one of the strongest cards in the game at the moment. It costs 0 energy to retreat it. The energy used is the energy already attached to the Pokemon, not the energy from your energy zone. I was confused by this when I first started playing the game myself. You can reduce the retreat cost with an item card called X-Speed, which we mentioned earlier in the video. Unlike normal Pokemon games, Pokemon cards do not have resistance to other types. Pokemon Pocket has a simplified version where if you attack a type over which you have an advantage, your attacks will deal 20 extra damage. This damage buff applies only when attacking active Pokemon. So if you use Blizzard with Articuno, your opponent's benched fire Pokemon will not take that extra damage, only 10 damage. To find what type of attack your Pokemon is weak to, look at the bottom left of the Pokemon card, right above the rarity. This is how a typical turn, not turn 1 or 2 would go. First, we draw a card from our deck automatically. This step is mandatory. Then we analyze our hand and decide how we want to play out this turn. I always suggest doing this step first before playing out any of your cards, so you don't make any mistakes. I would always play out my Pokeball first if I have it in my hand to see what basic Pokemon I can draw. If you have Professor's Research, I would play him out after Pokeball unless you can win the game using another supporter card like Giovanni, or maybe you need to play out a supporter card like Sabrina to save yourself from losing. Then I would retreat my Pokemon if needed and evolve any Pokemon that needs evolving. Remember, you can use X speed to make retreating a Pokemon cheaper. If there are any abilities you can use like Gardevoir's ability Psy Shadow, make sure to use them too. Next, we can attach energy to a Pokemon, either active or benched, depending on the strategy we're going for. If we didn't use Professor's Research at the start of the turn, we can use a supporter card like Sabrina or Giovanni to help us KO an opponent's Pokemon, or to maybe mess up their plan a little bit. Say if they've been pumping their active Pokemon with energy and we use Sabrina to force them to switch to a benched Pokemon with no energy and 2 energy cost to retreat, their next turn will effectively be ruined unless they have 2x speed in their hand. And finally, we can attack using our active Pokemon and end our turn. Each turn has a time limit of 90 seconds, which is quite generous. I did run out of time a few times when I first started playing the game. It almost never happens now that I'm more familiar with the game. Active Pokemon can be affected by special conditions, just like in standard Pokemon games. At the end of every turn, a Pokemon checkup is performed to check the state of each player's Pokemon. I won't go into a lot of details for every possible condition, but I'll add them to the video so you can pause it and read up if you wish to do so. Note that only active Pokemon can be affected by these special conditions, and Pokemon can recover from them if it moves to the bench, evolves, or you use a card effect that helps your Pokemon recover from it. Coin flips are a huge part of Pokemon Pocket. From deciding who goes first to how much damage an ability deals, it's hard to escape them in this game. I mentioned earlier that there is an exception to the rule that you cannot attach energy and attack on turn 1. And that exception is Misty, the biggest coin flip simulator in the game. With Misty, even if you do go first, you can get lucky and attack your opponent's active Pokemon. It's even possible to win the game on turn 1 if you get lucky coin flips and your opponent has no benched Pokemon. So that's it, you should now be able to jump into the game and kick some Pokemon butts easily. But before you do, make sure you subscribe to my channel for more useful guides and decklist videos. I would also really appreciate it if you could leave a like and a comment, and let me know if you have any questions at all and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And I'll see you next time, bye!